Hello and welcome to True Crime on the History Fella channel. My name is Ben and today we're going to be looking at the Pembrokeshire murders. Although first of all, before I get started, I must apologise because I've got a bit of a cold. So if you hear the odd cough, I apologise. But hopefully it won't be too much. Anyway, let's get on. The Pembrokeshire murders. Born on the 3rd of September 1944. John Cooper lived in Milford Haven, a small fishing town in South Pembrokeshire, Wales, where he worked as a farm labourer. He was a keen fisherman and knew the local area well, spending most of his free time living an outdoor lifestyle. In 1966 he married Patricia and the couple had 2 children, a girl and a boy. In 1978 Cooper won a new car and £90,000 in a competition, which is about £500,000 today. He went on to set up a small farm, but due to his gambling habit, alcoholism and poor financial choices, the money soon disappeared. Shortly after, Cooper turned to burglary. He was a prolific thief in his late teens, and he knew how to get in and out of most homes. In his youth, he was charged with stealing a car and assaulting a police officer. In total, he'd committed around 30 robberies and violent assaults on the unsuspecting public. To residents of Milford Haven, John Cooper was a likeable rogue-type character, but he took his aggression out on his son behind closed doors. In a television documentary for Real Crime, Andrew, Cooper's son, said that while fishing with his father, the 11-year-old was hit in the face and pushed to the floor. Cooper then pointed a gun at his son and told him that he was worthless and his family didn't want him anymore. Cooper then pulled the trigger, but the gun was empty. The abuse was continuous, and Andrew, now an adult, has 12 screws holding his spine in place from being punched so viciously in the back when he was a child. 3 days before Christmas of 1985, Cooper broke into a large farmhouse in Scoverston Park, near to Milford Haven. The home belonged to Richard and Helen Thomas, and Cooper likely knew that Helen, who was in her 50s, was alone in the 3-storey home. While he was robbing the house, Richard returned home and surprised Cooper. During the subsequent scuffle that ensued, he shot Richard in the stomach and then the head. Helen had been tied up and shot in the head too. He then poured diesel all over the house before setting it on fire to cover any tracks he'd left behind. An investigation was carried out, but police believed it was a robbery that had gone wrong. Nevertheless, a door-to-door inquiry was carried out, which included the Coopers' family home. They all had an alibi, though. They were all in the home together when the robbery and fire took place. Cooper, though, had told his son to lie to the police, who as a child thought nothing of it, and Cooper was never suspected as being the murderer. On the 28th of May 1989, Cooper was a contestant on a British television show called Bullseye, a televised general knowledge darts quiz. He missed out on the top prize though that night. 3 weeks later, he killed 2 more people. Peter and Gwenda Dixon were out walking on the Little Haven path near the coastline. The couple were in their 50s and had gone to the region from Oxfordshire to enjoy the fresh air, as they had done for many years previously. The community was quiet and friendly, with a picturesque shoreline that attracted hundreds of tourists every year. On the last day of their holiday, the pair went for a short hike. They told nearby neighbours in the campsite that they were going for one final walk before they travelled home, but they were never seen alive again. Half a mile from their campsite, they entered a pathway surrounded by trees, where John Cooper was waiting for them. He brandished a sawn-off shotgun and told them to give him their money. During their capture, Peter gave Cooper his bank card and PIN, which Cooper withdrew £300 from different ATMs around the local area later that day. He took Peter's wedding ring and then shot them both in the face. 2 days later, their son Tim reported them missing, and the police began a search. The hunt for the couple didn't last long, and the police dogs found their bodies quite quickly. The violence used on the couple was unprecedented, and it became the largest murder inquiry in Pembrokeshire. Shortly after the discovery of his parents' bodies, Tim made a public statement and a plea for information surrounding their murders. Witnesses came forward and gave police a description of an odd-looking man they'd seen using an ATM in the town that day. Investigators interviewed 6,000 people, and one of them was John Cooper himself, who was working as a farm labourer again. The police had no reason, though, to suspect Cooper at the time, as they didn't know about his history or violence towards his family and others. After 18 months of searching for the killer, the investigation had hit a standstill, and resources were dispersed elsewhere in the police department. In March 1996, Cooper robbed 5 people in one go. A group of teenagers were walking through a field at sunset in Milford Haven when they saw a man walking towards them. He was wearing a balaclava and fired a warning shot into the air with his gun. He then sexually assaulted one girl and raped another, and took money from the rest of the teenagers. No one, though, was caught for these crimes. The police knew very little about the suspect, but they were beginning to see a pattern within the 70 recent robberies in the area. They knew that the man wore a balaclava. He entered the property in the evening, and his weapon of choice was a sawn-off shotgun. In November of the same year, Cooper was interrupted during a robbery and threw pieces of his gear into a nearby hedge, when he fled. These objects included a gun and balaclava. While searching the nearby area, police knocked on the door of one home to see if the residents had seen anything. When they found the stolen property, it was John Cooper's home. The house was immediately searched, as was Cooper's family's homes around the area, and a substantial amount of stolen goods were discovered. He was found to be involved in almost 30 robberies and additional armed robbery. While in custody, he was questioned about the murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon and Richard and Helen Thomas. He denied knowing anything about the killings, and police learned he would never admit to what he had done. So they began to search for evidence that would put him at the crime scenes. In the late 90s, forensics was still in its infancy in West Wales, and despite police efforts, they couldn't find anything to link him to the 4 murders. But they could imprison him for the thefts. In 1998, John Cooper was sentenced to 14 years in prison for the robberies. While in prison, police continued to build a case against Cooper. They carefully kept all the evidence from the 4 murders, knowing that one day they'd be able to find the killer, hopefully. In 2006, the investigations were reopened. The advance in technology was going to make solving the cases much easier for police. Still, over the years, the amount of evidence amassed in the 4 murders and the rape and robbery of the teenagers had reached around 2 million exhibits and reports. The police were sure that John Cooper was involved, but they had to find the truth about the 3 investigations, whatever the outcome. They needed to prioritise which pieces of evidence held the key to solving the cases. Over the next few months, the police set up a team of officers who interviewed people in John Cooper's life. They found out information from his family, primarily his son Andrew, who had been subject to torment and abuse throughout his childhood. Cooper had begun to rob houses for the money, but also the thrill. He'd become accustomed to the lifestyle given to him by the £90,000 he'd won originally in the competition. In July 2008, investigators interviewed John Cooper for 4 days, who was about to be released for the robberies. They talked about his life and his work, and he began to open up to them. He spoke about the shotgun he used in the robberies and told them that he was under the impression that the gun would be destroyed after the case had gone to court. But at the point of the interviews, it was still in evidence, and he seemed rather nervous about that prospect. Police had the gun tested by the forensics team again, but John Cooper had been released after serving 10 years in prison. The investigative team tested the clothing worn by Cooper, which matched the sketch made by a witness. In April 2009, they found their evidence. There was a 20-year-old drop of blood on Cooper's shorts, and it belonged to Peter Dixon. From here, the evidence kept on coming. The shorts had been restitched after purchase, and under the hemline, forensic investigators found DNA from the Dixon's daughter, Julie. Cooper had stolen the shorts from Peter Dixon during the robbery and had kept them for over 10 years. There were also fibres from the balaclava present in the underwear of one of Cooper's teenage rape victims. Also, fibres were found in Peter Dixon's stolen shorts that matched fibres found on Richard Thomas's socks. He was still wearing the souvenirs he'd taken from his victims decades later. Blood was eventually found on the shotgun, kept from Cooper's original robbery conviction. The gun had been painted after the murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon, and the blood underneath the thick black paint had been maintained. Investigators didn't want to leave anything to chance. They needed to get a conviction, so they began to look at the sketch made by the witness. The producers of Bullseye, the television show, gave investigators a profile shot taken from the programme, and the resemblance was there. The time between filming the show and the murders was only a few weeks, and he looked exactly the same. In May 2009, John Cooper was arrested for the 4 murders. He initially told police that the shorts were stolen from Peter Dixon were actually bought for him by his wife many years earlier. He also said that his son Andrew was the perpetrator, saying that he often borrowed his clothes. So we can see what type of man he was, willing to drop his own son in it and blame him for any crimes. Cooper was put on trial in March 2011 and was charged with the 4 murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon, Richard and Helen Thomas, and the robbery, rape and sexual assault of the teenagers in Milford Haven. The trial at Swansea Crown Court lasted 9 weeks, and witnesses for the prosecution included John Cooper's son Andrew and the 2 female teenagers who were sexually assaulted. The court was shown the vast amount of forensic evidence against the defendant and the photos of the faceless Peter and Helen Dixon. It took the jury just 3 days to decide on the verdict. Guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison. John Cooper attempted to appeal his conviction later that year, but the Lord Chief Justice refused it. It took 25 years to take John Cooper to court for the murders. In May 2011, after Cooper was convicted of the 4 murders, it was revealed that police were considering reopening an inquiry into the unexplained death in 1989 of a woman who lived near Cooper and only 2 miles from Scoverston Park, the site of the 1985 murders. Flo Evans, a 72-year-old widow, died soon after Cooper murdered Peter and Gwenda Dixon. In 1989, she was found fully clothed in a full cold bath of water in her cottage. Cooper and his wife Patricia both knew Evans and would visit her regularly at her small holding, with Cooper often completing odd jobs for her. She was unexpectedly mentioned by Cooper in his trial as part of his own defense evidence, and during interviews he discussed how he had been in her home when detectives were already aware of her suspicious death. Her home was in the centre of the area that Cooper committed his burglaries. The family of Evans had long suspected her death was suspicious and not an accident, particularly as she never took baths, and she would not have had any hot water at the time of her death, as no fire had been lit in the kitchen. Evans' death was officially recorded as accidental, with it said at the time that she must have slipped into the bath and hit her head and then drowned. Police contacted the widow's family after Cooper's conviction to discuss her death, saying there was a connectivity between Cooper and Evans. And there we have the story of John Cooper. Quite a sinister type of character, proving that often people can be two-faced, revealing a sort of a bright, roguish, happy side on the outside to the public, and yet indoors they can be a completely different character. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. You've been watching the History Fella channel. If you enjoyed the story, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then please feel free to do so. There will be some more true crime stories coming up very soon. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and please take care.